The federal government has been shamed into doing something about water, dams. Don't hold your breath. $150 million announced in Washington to help America put some person into space. The federal government's defence is the money will be spent in Australia. That's not the point. Farmers are saying, how can we be forgotten? And they are, no matter how much Canberra will tell you, they are not. I cannot name a farmer who has had relief from the funds generously given by you on this matter of drought, and the people have been fantastic. Then, of course, there's a $5 billion future drought fund. Everything's got a different name. Anastasia Palaszczuk has written to Scott Morrison about all of this because, while it has been announced, it doesn't start until July 1 next year. Queensland Premier is saying, can the farmers have some money now? But then there's a $4 billion emergency response fund. They've all got these fancy names, highly paid bureaucrats. The only trouble is the $5 billion future drought fund is way out into the future, July 1 next year, and the $4 billion emergency response fund, there's no response. It's been parked with some Senate committee. Farmers whistle Dixie, and they're angry, bloody angry. The quiet Australians are not quiet anymore. Then Jackie Trad in Queensland gives every public servant $1,250 for no reason at all. Just chuck $250 million at public servants to buy some votes in Jackie Trad's seat of South Brisbane. So, $150 million from Canberra for an American space program, $230 million from Jackie Trad for public servants, all up $380 million. And farmers can't afford the freight to bring fodder and water from where it is to where the farmers need it. Then you've got farmers in Queensland prosecuted for trying to keep their stock alive by feeding them mulga. You've got dairy farmers walking off their properties, so I suppose we'll start importing milk and butter and cheese. The beef farmer is selling his breeding stock for next to nothing. So basically, that industry's been decimated. All Canberra can talk about is whether Gladys Liu should be a member of Parliament or not. And New South Wales are worried about abortion. The anger is palpable. Then there's water. The hope of the side is a bloke not many people other than those in New South Wales may know, John Barilaro. He's one of the few people in Parliament who's actually filled out a payroll tax slip. In fact, the only time he has ever been paid by anyone else was when he became an MP. He's sitting here beside us. You'll meet him again in a moment. I'll get him to show you his hands because he's a worker. He's used his hands to make a quid before he entered Parliament. And along with a few of us, he's shamed Canberra into saying something about dams. Don't get too excited. There are no shovels in the ground and not likely to be. There is some talk of money, only because John Barilaro said 9 days ago he was prepared to go it alone in New South Wales. In an outstanding piece that he wrote back on September 16, he said, quote, what if our bureaucrats were directed to just get on with it and leaders made the tough calls to get this done? Does it matter if we put the budget into deficit for a period? If we as a state, in the midst of the worst drought on record, can't use this crisis, and yes, he said, it's a crisis, then we might as well give it all away. He's right here beside me. Barra, good evening to you.
Good evening, Alan.
Hey, the hands have got a bit polished up since you left the old whatever you were doing.
No, I'm still missing a bit. I lost a bit of that finger on a machine once upon a time.
Tell them what you did, though, before you came to...
I was a tradie and a chippy and ran a factory and I loved what I did. And, I mean, I think we came to fame when John Howard and Peter Costello used to use our factory background for work choices because we're positioned there in Queanbeyan, just outside of Canberra, so we were always the perfect backdrop. John Howard and Peter Costello would leave and the unions would move in and give me hell for a little while. But
you're the member for Monero, and in one statement that you made, it's one of Australia's most iconic engineering feats, the Snowy Hydro scheme. 16 dams, 225 kilometres of pipeline, 7 power stations. It's the Hydro Snowy Mountain scheme. You said if you proposed it today, it wouldn't be built.
Absolutely, in this political environment of not being able to make decisions because you fear the daily poll, you know, we allow people, and it's often the minority, to dictate to government what is right and what is wrong, and we joke about it in the Monero. Imagine putting up the scheme. Imagine saying to a little community which was out of Minibee, we're going to move you up on the hill so we can flood your town, so we can build a dam for the benefit of this nation, not just for today, for the generations to come. I mean, they were statesmen. They were our forefathers making significant decisions that the ones that made the initial decision never cut the ribbon. So isn't that what they want?
When was the last dam built in New South Wales?
30 years ago.
Yeah, it's a significant dam, yeah, in excess of 30 years ago.
Yeah, 30 years
We've
ago.
been held to ransom, and we all know.
Ludicrous. That's mad.
Absolutely.
See, we've never had money since Federation has never been cheaper. Why wouldn't you build everything with that money? I mean, you'd build dams, you'd build a coal-fired power station, you'd build hospitals, schools, roads and bridges. You get it all done at 2%.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cheaper than CPI. Build it today. It'll be cheaper than you saving money for the future because you can deliver it. And it's only going to get cheaper next week. I think interest rates will drop another 0.25%. But the reality is, it's not even just money's not the issue here, because we can get our hands on money, either a reserve money that's in reserves at a state level, or the feds maybe have to borrow a bit more. It's about red and green tape. The process behind getting an approval. I had a small dam built in Nimmitabel, a little town in my electorate, 150 people. It took 6 years. It was $6 million in the end to build. Small town that was on stage 6 water restrictions for 10 years. I got in, we got it built 6 years late. Out of the $6 million, $2.5 million was spent on environmental impact studies, duplicated at a local level, state level and federal level. This is what's going to stop us building dams.
See, what he said, Graham, in that piece that he wrote, that he was even contemplating, quote, abandon community consultation and environmental impact studies, get them built quickly. Something's got to give. Something's got to give.
We know where we want to build them. We've been speaking about these dams for how long?
I know.
10, 20, 30 years. We know we're going to build the dam at Dungowan for Tamworth, the Mould River Dam up on the Queensland and New South Wales border, raise the Wyangla Dam wall down in the Central West. We know we've got to do it. Well, why slow it up by going through a process? And if you allow those bureaucrats, especially the green bureaucrats, they're going to use that process to tell you why you can't do it. Go back to the Snowy Hydro scheme. They use that process to tell them how to do it, to find a solution to build, not a reason not to.
Well, I think
Greens don't like dams.
No, they do not. Nor does Daniel Andrews.
They interfere with the natural flow of things. So Greens, just generally speaking, are opposed to dams.
But we have to disagree with that. If you want to believe in climate change and say that we're going to get the impacts of severe rainstorms and flooding, and then we can get dry, longer periods, the best thing you can do for the river system, for the environment, is a regulated river system where you've got storage to deal with it. So build a dam for when it rains, we store, and we've got to be smarter about this. It's not just your traditional dam, underground dams, recharge aquifers so we don't lose water to evaporation. They've been doing it all over the world.
But it's more than that. When the crunch comes, it's not just about worrying about the environmental plans. I'm worried about turning the tap and actually humans having water to drink. That seems to me to be the #1 priority.
Well, the #1 threatened species at the moment isn't a bloody frog. It is actually regional and rural Australia, and in our case, regional and rural New South Wales. Our communities are the threatened species.
There are the pictures there. Look, you would know, and Graham would remember, Saleo Heilscher, who was one of the most outstanding figures in Queensland for a long, long time. He's now 92. Sir Frank Moore is one of the great Queensland media figures. He's 88. These two men are outstanding. Both of them know regional Queensland backwards. They talk endlessly of a simple plan, open vast areas of Queensland and New South Wales, they say, to high-value food and fibre production. Now, what they're suggesting, they're saying what they're doing, what they're recommending, the Murray-Darling would never be dry. They want a connected dam. The dam now, they're building this Hells Creek Dam in the north of Queensland, as you know. So Scott Morrison, to be fair to him, has offered $54 million last November for the project. And there's talk of $5 billion in irrigated agriculture there. He wants to redefine, Heilscher, Queensland's agriculture growth, water security, it's the big rocks weir. And he said, connect that now with tunnels and channels and pipelines, meet up with the Thompson and Warrego rivers. I wish I had a map to show you there. Eliminate flooding, save the Murray-Darling, open up west of the Great Dividing Range to food and fibre production, water for renewable hydroelectric power. Do it. Now, hello, it's simple. These blokes know the scene backwards. They've got it. It's on paper. They've got the maps. They've got the lot. And we can get the money.
Absolutely. And that is the sort of scheme you want to see. One that captures floodwaters when it rains, it pipes it or whatever way it travels back to the centre of the state or the country, and you can actually unlock the prosperity for regional rural Australia.
You want to cry every time we have a flood and you see it all flowing out to sea.
Out to sea. I've always said, if you want to see regional rural Australia prosper, just add water.
Well,
this is how you do it.
You had that area in Queensland, as big as England earlier this year, underwater, 37 inches of rain, all goes into the ocean. Now, Jack Beale, what's the year? 2019, isn't it? In 1948, Jack Beale said, for God's sake, that's 70 years ago, he said, surplus coastal water is the logical future source for arid inland development and electricity generation. The water captured under this scheme, he's talking about the Clarence River Basin scheme, the water captured under the scheme could be diverted to Queensland, into the Murray-Darling, double the flow of the Murray-Darling, minimise its salinity. He said a nation can't afford to let resources remain idle, even if it has to build pyramids. 1948.
Yeah, again, yeah, as I said earlier, statesman, visionary, and today we're all caught up in this election cycle, and we make commitments around election cycles rather than taking the courageous decision. It's no different when I went into my election, held my seat with 2.5% down in the Monero. I was speaking about nuclear energy. You know how unpopular that can be. But if you actually have conviction about what you stand for, and the public are happy to hear from you. And the same with dams. This is the time. If we've learnt nothing from the
marginal, now you've got a marginal.
12%, yeah. I grew. I had the largest swing in the state to me.
That's it.
They want leadership. There's no doubt the Australian public want leadership. We have to make tough decisions. We don't always have to consult and engage, because when it comes to dams and water infrastructure, we know as a nation what we need to do. It's just time to get on with it.
Can I just say, see, we forget all our history. C.Y. O'Connor was a brilliant figure in Western Australia prior to 1900. And, of course, as you know, they discovered gold. At Kalgoorlie and Coolgardie, they had no water. O'Connor himself individually pioneered the Goldfields Water Supply Scheme. Started in 1898. He was going to pump water from the Mundaring Weir on the Helena River, just outside Perth, to the Goldfields. It was a long way, 500 kilometres. Started in 1898. 21 steel mains, 30 inches in diameter. This is 1898. 5 million gallons of water delivered daily to Coolgardie. It was finished in 1902. But, coming to your point, the criticism of O'Connor, because that budget for that project was bigger than the whole of the colony's budget, the criticism was unbelievable. He felt vilified. In March 10, 1902, he went for an early morning horse ride. He rode his horse into the ocean. They heard the shot of the gun, and he committed suicide. C.Y. O'Connor. And yet only months later, and that was 4 years from Perth to Coolgardie in 1898, the thing was opened and the water was delivered to Coolgardie and Kalgoorlie. They could do it in 1898 and we can't do it now.
Yeah, that's a great story. I've heard that before. I've read that story. It is inspiring. But if you want to be a leader, you can't expect it to be easy. You've got to make those tough decisions. But as I said, we learnt very little from the Millennium Drought. This is the drought that we must learn from. If we don't get it right this time, Alan, we'll never get it right.
Well, how many dams are you looking at in New South Wales? How many need to be built, John?
Well, we've identified about 7 straight up that we should be that we can get on with in New South Wales. 3 for sure. It's the Dungow and the Moles River and the raising of.
Given that you've got a tender for these things, Melinda Pavey, whom I think is a very good lady, she's the Water Minister. She's saying that with the tendering process and everything, it'll be 3 years before anything starts. When do you reckon? Because you're fair dinkum about this. When do you reckon you'll get a shovel in the ground?
Well, that's the point. That was a piece of my op-ed about how do we actually truncate these processes, red and green tape. We've had a conversation with the Premier, myself, with Scott Morrison and the Deputy Prime Minister federally. We talked about funding, and then we talked about, because we need both federal and state governments to be in parallel and in unison here, we talked about how do we truncate all the processes, and the Prime Minister, I give credit to, has said, let's put it all on the table so that we can truncate and we can get on with building dams. So I'm saying that in this term of the federal government, which is only really 2.5 years away, we will build dams. That's how focused I am, and I'm confident with the response from the Prime Minister we can do this. And if we don't, well then, you know what, we should all be...
We don't deserve to be there.
Exactly, we don't deserve to be there, and I'm happy to face the electorate at 2023, and the feds will have to do in 2022, and we'll deserve the wrath of the people.
Good on you. Can't do better than that, can you?
That's pretty good.
No, he's a good fellow, this bloke's John Barilaro. He is the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, but we'll talk to him the day he puts the shovel in the ground.
Absolutely.
Have you got bipartisan support on this?
Look, I always think you have bipartisan support, but I always get surprised in the House about what should be bipartisan. But saying that, the Labor Party did support right-to-farm legislation today, which surprised me. I think on this issue we will get bipartisan.
I must say, I think Anthony Albanese, the opposition leader, his strong suit is infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Albanese will support anything on that common sense approach towards it. But it's got to start yesterday. All right, Barra, good to talk to you.
Thank you.
There he is, the Deputy Premier of New South Wales, John Barilaro.